my name is Hossein. Today I'm going to talk about test automation frameworks that we have seen already in test-driven development video. What is a test automation framework? A testing framework is a set of guidelines or rules used for creating and designing test cases. A framework generally is actually comprised of a combination of practices and tools that are designed to help developers test more efficiently. In .NET Framework, there are several test automation frameworks like xunit.net and Unit MS Test that is created by Microsoft. But the one that I prefer to work with is xunit.net. Let's take a look at an example. I have the following code and I want to test it. There is just a really simple console application called auction management here and a class called auction inside this console application. And I want to test this class. When I want to test something, there are two different options. First is manual testing, which is hard, time wasting, and fragile. Imagine big companies like Facebook and Google, Twitter, Amazon. If they want to test all their big applications manually, how many time they waste, and they can give fast feedbacks from their code, and it is actually impossible. It does not make sense. But the second option, and of course the better one, is automated tests. And when we want to test automatically, we do need a test automation framework. Take a look at this code. I want to test it. Let me explain what this code is doing. At this code, there are three properties: seller ID, bidder ID, and amount, and a constructor that takes three arguments. And the intent of this auction is to check if seller ID is equal bidder ID, throw some exception. If amount is less than 0, throw some exception. And if these two rules are not true, initial seller ID, bidder ID, and amount with these three arguments. And these exceptions actually are not familiar for you because I've created these two exceptions customized for myself for this project. They are here at exceptions folder. If you don't know how to create custom exceptions in .NET, go back and see my previous videos how to create custom exceptions in C#. Okay, now we know what this test is doing. I want to analyze this constructor, because we are not test TDD and test first now. If we have been test first, we had to think about it earlier, but we are not test first here. My intended at this video is to explain you xunit and test automation framework. So I have created this project for that. Okay, at this constructor there are three execution paths. The first one is when seller ID is equal bidder ID. It throws an exception and the application ends. The first execution path can happen at this code. The second one is when amount is less than 0 and it throws an exception. The application ends, and this is the third execution path. And the third one is when none of these two happen, and there is no error, there is no exception. I set an initialize properties, and this is happy path, when there is no error and there is no exception. Okay, for testing this method, actually this class, I need to create another project. So in solution, I right click, add a new project. And my project should be of type of unit test project. And I call it action tests. Wrong. Action tests. Visual Studio created this project for me, but notice something. This test case attribute and this test method attribute. These two attributes are for MS Test Automation Framework, which is created and developed by Microsoft. Visual Studio by default creates our test project with reference to MS Test DLLs, but I don't want to use MS Test, so I delete this class and I remove MS Test references, and in packages.config there are two references here, which is for MS Test Test Adapter and MS Test Test Framework. I delete these two, save my project, clean up workspace. Okay, now I have to install xunit.net. For installing xunit.net on this project, you have to go to Package Manager Console. If you don't have Package Manager Console here, come here, Tools. I'm sorry, where it be? Tools. NuGet Package Manager and Package Manager Console. You can find it there, and it will be appear here. Change the default project to Action Tests. Oh, I'm sorry, I made a mistake. It is not Action Tests. It is not Action Tests. It should be Action Management.tests. So I deleted it from here and create another project, add new project, Action Management.tests. Okay, I delete this extra class and do the same thing I have done, deleting these two DLLs, and in packages.config delete these two references, save the project, clean up the workspace, come open Package Manager Console and change the default project to Action Management.tests. Say install dash package xunit. This is xunit NuGet. It takes some seconds and it will be installed after. Okay, xunit has been installed now, but we have to run our tests. There's something called Test Runner. Visual Studio Test Runner is this Test Explorer. Here, if you don't see this Test Explorer windows, come here to Test, Windows, Test Explorer. This Test Explorer have to find our tests and run them. But by default, this Test Explorer cannot run xunit tests. So xunit runner should be installed on this project. I say install dash package xunit.runner.visual studio. Okay, and it sees everything is all right. Xunit runner is installed, and I can keep going and write my tests. For writing action tests, I must create a new class. So I right click on my action management tests, add a new class called action tests. I have to remove all unused directives, make this class public. Okay. In xunit, we have to specify our test methods and mark them by an attribute called fact. Test runner will find all methods that are marked by fact attribute and list them here, and we can run them. So my method is public void, I call it constructor should construct action properly. And the word properly means that my constructor should initial these three properties, and I want to exercise this because I always have to test the happy path, and the happy path is when I set these properties to their appropriate amount, their appropriate value that are here, that are passed here. Okay, test explorer, Visual Studio test explorer found my test, and if I comment this fact attribute and build this project, it did not need build, it's real time, it works real time, and my test is not showing here anymore. If I uncomment it, test explorer should find it here with name constructor should construct auction properly. Very well. First, I have to config my SUT. SUT means system under test, and my system under test in this test is my auction. Okay, I should say const long seller ID equals, for example, 10, const long bidder ID equals 30, const, it is double, yes, it is double, amount equals, for example, $1,000. Yes. Now I have to call my constructor. How to call a constructor? It's so easy. When you instantiate a new instance of a class, its constructor will be called automatically. So I say var auction equals new auction, but I can't use auction class here because my automation, my auction management, the test project, does not have any idea of auction management, so I have to reference it. In references, I say right click, add reference to auction management, and now auction is found, and I pass seller ID, bidder ID, and amount. Okay, what I want to check and assert now is to this seller ID should be equal this one because I passed it here as an argument. For checking this, I have to assert. For asserting in xunit, we have a class called assert, and in this class I have many methods, and I want to check and I want to assert the equality of two values, so I use equal method. Equal method takes two arguments. The first argument is the expected one. I expect seller ID, the constant long seller ID here, should be equal to, and the second argument is actual value. My actual value is auction dot seller ID. I want to assert that seller ID and auction dot seller ID are equal or not. The second thing I have to check is assert dot equal bidder ID should be equal auction dot bidder ID, and the same thing for amount. Assert dot equal amount should be equal auction dot amount. Very well. Let me run this test. For running this test, I can come to the test explorer, right click on my test and click on run selected test. Okay, this test is run in this time 116 milliseconds, and it is passed now. If I change this to bidder ID, I want to do something that this test fails. I said here bidder ID should be equal seller ID, and it is wrong because it never happens. But I want to show you how a test fails. And right click on my test, run selected test. And it failed. Okay? And you can see here the reason that the test failed. Test fails. The message is the expected one. The expected value is 30. It is here. But the actual one is 10, which is here that we have passed, which is seller ID. And it is wrong. It is so obvious that this is wrong. We have to change it to seller ID. Always read this description. This is so good. This so helps. So helps a lot. So I run this test again, and it should pass now, and it's passed, and it has passed as expected. The second execution path that I want to test is constructor should throw exception when, okay, what is the condition? When seller ID is the same as bidder ID. Okay, when seller ID is the same as bidder ID, sorry, ID, and this is my second test method. I should config my SUD, I copy from here and paste it here, but I want seller ID to be equal bidder ID, so I make it 10. In xunit, when you want to test an exception, there's a method called throws. I say assert dot throws, and throws is generic because if you want to test that a functionality exactly throws the exception, you should use the common throws method. But if you want to specify your exception, you should use the generic one. So throws what kind of exception? I say same seller ID and bidder ID exception. I want this functionality to throw this exception, and the argument of a throws method is an action. Okay, it takes an action. So I use the action action template. I forgot the word, action template, which is an error callback function. I say new action with seller ID, bidder ID, and amount, and the semicolon at the end. This test should be passed now, because with this data, it throws this exception. I right click on my test, run selected tests, and it behaved as expected. This test passed. The third execution path I want to test is this: public void constructor should throw exception when what? When amount is less than 0, which is not meaningful. When amount is less than 0. Very well. I should config my SUD again and make the amount, for example, minus 100. And say this: assert dot, throws what kind of exception I expect this functionality to throw: invalid amount exception. And the action is new action seller ID, bidder ID, and amount. I close it by semicolon. This test is found by Test Explorer. I right click on it and run selected tests. And it failed. Let me read the failure. Okay, look at it. The expected exception is invalid amount exception, which I wrote here, but the actual is same seller ID and bidder ID. And the reason is what? And the reason why is here, when I copied the SUT configuration from this test, I forgot to change this value. These two values are the same, and this exception will raise first. So I've changed this. Save and run them all again. And they all passed like this. Okay, this is xunit. This is so easy. It is so easy working with xunit. Xunit has many other methods for asserting our data. It has, for example, true, if you want to check a boolean that is true or not, or false, if you want to check a boolean is exactly false, or contains, that which is used for checking if an object is inside an enumerable. You can make sure that an object is inside an enumerable, or many other methods that you can use for testing your SUT. They are all here. It is so easy to work with, but there are two important methods. I always use them, which is equal and throws. They are so useful. Okay, that's it. This is xunit. You can work with it and test your SUT. Always test your system. Thank you so much. If you learned something and liked my video, please subscribe and push that red button there. Subscribe my channel to see more interesting videos. Thank you.